Hello lovely, welcome back to another video. In today's video I'm going to be chatting through my birth story. So I did do a very small sort of short birth vlog. I will link that in the description down below, but this is going to be a chat through because a few things happened and I just want to go through the whole process with you guys. So this is Rhea. She was born on the 24th of October at 2:01 a.m. She weighed 9.6 pounds. She's fast asleep. Let's get straight into it, I guess. So on the evening of the 23rd of October, it was a Monday evening. It was a Monday evening. I had a fairly normal day and a normal evening. I did Juno's bath time routine with her. Phil put her down to bed and they were just chilling on the sofa, and honestly, nothing was happening. I had that day actually was feeling a little bit fed up of being pregnant and said to Phil, I'm going to go into labour today. I'm speaking it into the universe and it's going to happen. And as I was sat on the sofa that night, I was like, it's definitely not going to happen tonight. I'm having no contractions. I have felt absolutely nothing. Nothing is happening. So we got in bed and we went to sleep. Probably quite early. It was probably about 9:30 in the evening when we got in bed. So I woke up at about 10 p.m. to the sensation of water just gushing out of me. And that sounds pretty TMI, but I literally cannot give you a better explanation. It was gushing out of me. In bed, I was just lying down. I hadn't moved. I was asleep and my waters broke at about 10. And I woke Phil up, although he was kind of already awake. He was like half asleep. And he said, what was that noise? And I said, my waters have broken. And he was like, oh my gosh, I heard them pop. So he actually heard my waters pop as he was like drifting off to sleep, which is mad. So my waters have broken and the bed was absolutely soaked, completely soaked. And yeah, that was that. So we decided to get up. We got up straight away. I went and stood in the bathroom and sort of sorted myself out. Phil brought me loads of towels. Phil got dressed and ready and we went downstairs. So I think if this had been my first labour, I probably would have been like, oh, well, nothing might not happen now. But because my first labour had been so fast with Juno, I was kind of like, let's get ready and get ready to leave so that we're ready. We can go at any point. So I text my mum. My mum was coming over to look after Juno. Juno was obviously asleep. So I text my mum and was like, my waters are broken. I think it's happening. You should probably leave. So she headed over here and it was about a half an hour drive for her. So we had plenty of time. And as soon as my waters are broken, I wasn't really feeling anything. I wasn't having any contractions, surges, anything like that. So I was a bit like, gosh, this might be us for the next couple of days. So I called the hospital. The hospital said, you know your body. If your waters are broken, we'll make a note of it because they usually, I think the risk of infection goes up quite a lot after 24 hours or 48 hours or something. So they made a note that my waters are broken and they said, call back when you start having contractions. So that was that. So the contractions sort of started coming in, and at first they were about 7 minutes apart. And my midwife had previously said to me, because this is your second labour and because your first labour was so fast, give us a ring when they're 5 minutes apart. So usually with your first, they say if you're having 3 contractions in 10 minutes that last about a minute. So that works out about every kind of 3-ish minutes. But this time she said, call at 5 minutes. When there's a pattern and they're 5 minutes apart, give us a ring. So they started about 7 or 8 minutes. I think a couple of them were 9 minutes apart, but within about an hour, they were a lot more intense and they were about 5-6 minutes apart. So I called back and said to the midwife, they're 5 minutes apart. They're getting a lot more intense. We're going to come in. And she was like, absolutely, go for it. My mum had been here for about half an hour at that point and was just kind of keeping herself to herself, letting me do what I needed to do. Yeah, she was great. So we left her here. Phil and I made our way to the hospital. Luckily for us, our hospital is about a 5-minute drive. So we got in the car. 5 minutes later, we were in the car park, making our way up to the maternity ward, or the maternity assessment unit, MAU. So I was having quite regular contractions at this point. They'd probably gone up to about 4 to 3 minutes apart. So I had one in the car, I had one in the car park, I had one in the lift, and then they kept rolling in when we were being assessed. So at that point, we got up to their maternity assessment unit and the midwife said, you know, we're going to need to assess you. So I was like, yeah, that's absolutely fine. So they put on like a monitor around my belly for the baby's heart rate, for Raya's heart rate. And then they also monitored mine. And this was like a bit, it didn't send me into a panic, but it was on my mind, definitely. So at this point, the midwife said to me, we can't tell, because my heart rate was a little bit higher. Obviously, adrenaline, I was in labour, it's quite natural. But because my heart rate was higher and babies' heart rates are naturally higher, they couldn't tell which was mine and which was baby's. So they said that that was quite normal, but that played on my mind a little bit because I was thinking, you know, can you actually hear baby's heart rate, or is it just my heart rate that you're picking up? So that definitely, yeah, I mean, it didn't make me anxious, but it just made me feel a bit on edge. So I was kind of thinking about that as I was labouring and thinking like, oh, I really hope they find it. And they did at some points, and then it kind of like fizzled out again and they thought it was mine, and it just dipped in and out. But that all happened. That was like a 5-minute thing. And then I kind of forgot about it. But at that point, oh, darling, are you okay? At that point, she was like, after you've had your next contraction, we'll get you on the bed and we will assess you to see how dilated you are. So that happened. And she said, okay, you're about 4 to 5 centimetres dilated. And I was like, oh, gosh. I thought that I was going in there at like 10 centimetres. I was like, I'm feeling the urge to kind of bear down and, you know, this is happening. But she said, you're 4 to 5 centimetres dilated. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to, you know, forget those numbers. Anything can happen. 10 minutes passed. I had 2 or 3 probably really strong surges, really strong contractions. And I was holding on to Phil and kind of swaying around. And the midwife came in. She was like, is everything okay? Like, how are you feeling? And I was like, I'm ready to push. The baby's coming. So in that 10-minute period, I had gone from 4 to 5 centimetres dilated to 10. So I just want to add at this point of the video, do not feel disheartened if you go into hospital and they tell you that you're only a certain amount dilated, because it could take literally minutes. It could take minutes for you to get all the way. So don't let those numbers bother you. Are you all right, Wriggly girl? Yeah, don't let those numbers bother you. Anything can happen. So at that point, I was still in the like maternity assessment unit. I hadn't been moved upstairs to like the birthing rooms. And I kind of was thinking in my head, I'm going to give birth in this room. I don't think I'm going to make it upstairs. But I asked them at that point, so there's one birthing pool at Brighton Hospital, and I said, is it free? And they said, yes, we'll start running it for you. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And they were like, we'll run it anyway. So they started running the bath, and I was kind of leant over the bed. They'd lifted the bed quite high, and I was like leant over it with my arms, kind of doing it like that. But at that point, I was like, I don't really know if I feel comfortable like this anymore. So they put like this pad out on the floor, and like this, it's basically like a mattress. They put a mattress out on the floor, and I was like on all fours on that mattress. I was really kind of feeling the urge to push. So I was starting to push and like trying to control my breathing and all of that stuff. And I was like, is the pool ready? Is the pool ready? And they were like, I don't think we're going to make it. It's filling up. It's at knee length. So at this point, I was like, if we can get up there, then I want to get in the pool, because I'd given birth to Juno in the pool. And I remember the feeling of the water when you get into it. It's just like, doesn't take the pain away, don't get me wrong, but it is so relieving. It just kind of water's always been like that for me, and when I get in it, my body just relaxes, and so much tension went away and my body just relaxed, and it gave me like a minute to just kind of collect myself. So back to the story. She said the bath's at knee length. Do you want to go up and try and carry on in there? And I was like, yep. So we were like, great. After the next contraction, we're going to go upstairs. She was like, the lifts are really dodgy. Can you manage the stairs? And I was like, how many stairs are there? She was like, there's 2 flights. I was like, yeah, go for it. So Phil's running with all of our stuff. She was like, do you want me to wrap a towel around you? I was like, you can if you want, but I don't really care, because I was like naked from the waist down. So I had this like little towel, you know, the towels that they give you in hospital to like put around your baby. Had one of those wrapped around me. Like, honestly, do you need a poo? Is that what this is about? Oh, there it is. Yeah, where was I? So she was like, there are other birth partners here. I remember her saying, I was like, I don't care. They're here to support their partners who are giving birth. No one cares about seeing my bum. Like, honestly, let's just go. Let's get up the stairs. Let's get in the birth pool. So that's what we did. We ran up the stairs. I mean, we didn't run. I wobbled very slowly and made the journey in that few minutes. And I was in the pool by the time the next contraction comes. So I was like, tick, that bit's done. When I got in the pool, I felt like this sense of relief. I touched on it a minute ago, but it gave me a minute to just find myself again and try and get back in control. Because in the other room, I felt like I was losing control a little bit. It was very intense. The surges were rolling around very quickly, and the peak of the surges, it felt quite different to what I had experienced with my first. I think with Juno, it kind of built really gradually, whereas with Rhea, she was like traveling down the birth canal, but kind of coming back up, and that sensation was really intense and also really kind of underwhelming, because it felt like I was putting so much in, and after every push off and using all of my energy, she'd just kind of retreat and just go back in. So that was really tough. But yeah, the water really helped with that sensation. And I was just kind of like, she's coming. I can feel her. She's right there. And she'll be here soon. It doesn't matter how long it takes, kind of thing. But I was at a point where I was like saying to Phil, I'm really struggling. I can't do this anymore. And Phil and the midwives were both great, saying, oh, darling, saying you've got this. You're going to smash this. But I just felt like, everyone the energy levels were just depleting with every contraction. So I was in the birth pool for about an hour. And like I said, it just felt like she was coming and then going back up and coming and then going back up. And I was saying to the midwife, like, she keeps going back in. She said, why don't you try lunge position? And it was so uncomfortable, but it worked. I got my leg kind of like, was still in all fours, but just had my right leg out to the side and delivered her head on the next contraction. So her head was delivered. And I knew at that point, because I'd already given birth, once their head's delivered on the next contraction, their body's just going to fly out. So I wanted to bring her out of the water and onto my chest. So I kind of turned myself around and sat back a little bit, like leant on my kind of coccyx bone, and really breathed. And I probably had a few minutes where I could just kind of sit there and breathe. It was so uncomfortable. I do not know how people birth and labour and birth on their back. The next surge came, and I remember saying to the midwife, do I need to like really, really push, or shall I just breathe through this? And she said, give it a big one. So I gave it a big push, and she came out, and I lifted her out of the water and onto my chest. And it was absolutely beautiful. That moment was just amazing. And it felt just incredible as lifting Juno out of the water. And Rhea was here and she sat on my chest for about 30 minutes and then she went over to Phil and I just kind of stayed in the pool, and it was really like a really lovely experience. And then unfortunately, this is where the experience kind of turned a little bit. So at this point, I want to add that my birth story and my birth experience with Rhea was beautiful and it was really positive, and I loved giving birth to her, and I would do it 100 times, a million times. I'd do it every day just to have her. But what happened after the birth wasn't so wonderful. Like I said, I was in the pool for about 30 minutes and Rhea was on my chest, and then she was like, does Daddy want a cuddle? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So Phil did some skin to skin. They took Rhea off me, gave her to Phil, and then it was like my turn to get out of the pool. I hadn't birthed the placenta yet at this point, so that was something that I needed to do. So I opted for the injection and we kind of waited. But the placenta wasn't coming. So I think they gave me another injection to try and kind of speed it up. And the placenta did eventually come. But with that came quite a lot of blood. And I could feel it. And I remember saying to the midwife, that feels like quite a lot of blood. And she said, yes, it is. And she gave it a few minutes, I think, to see if the blood flow would kind of stop. And unfortunately, it didn't. So she apologised to me in that moment and said, I'm really sorry, Frankie, but I'm going to have to ring the emergency button. Like pull the emergency buzzer or whatever language she used. And I just kind of went into my own zone and thought, I'm not going to let this freak me out in this moment. Like, things like this happen all the time. They deal with this all the time. It's absolutely fine. So the emergency buzzer was called, and, you know, I'd say probably 4 midwives came in. So now there was like 4 or 5 people in the room rather than just one, which was fine. I was kind of trying to zone out. Phil was still holding Rhea, and I was just kind of lying there, looking up at them, thinking, it's totally worth it. It's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. So they gave me some more drugs, which essentially contract your uterus. So I think basically what they thought wasn't happening properly was my uterus wasn't contracting quick enough. So it was, causing a bit of blood loss. So they managed to kind of get it under control, but I was still leaking quite a bit of blood. So that was that. And they were like, we'll give it a bit of time and see how much you lose between now and X. I think it was about an hour. So I was like, fine. So they took me into a different room and kind of let me start feeding Rhea, and I was sat with Phil and stuff, and every so often they kind of checked and came in and checked to see how much I was losing. And we were all kind of hopeful that it wouldn't mean I'd have to go into surgery and have a more thorough examination. So every time she came in, she was like, oh yeah, there's a little bit less, but it is still coming. We'll come back in 20 minutes. And then she came back and she was like, oh, you know, it is slowing down, but it's still there. And it's not a normal amount. It's a little bit more than normal. So I was like, fine. And then eventually they said, look, we're really sorry. We're really sorry, but you're still losing quite a lot of blood. And we think you need to go into theatre and have a more thorough examination. So I was just like absolutely gutted at this point, because if you go into theatre, obviously you have to have a spinal. So I had a spinal, so I was numb from the waist down. I was like, I'm going to be in here for a while. And having all of that kind of invasive procedures done means rounds of antibiotics and more painkillers and drugs and all of those things. And it's just something that I hadn't experienced with my first. Juno was born. I was in and out of hospital within 12 or 13 hours. So it just felt quite different and something I needed to wrap my head around. And it was of no fault of anyone's. And the doctors were just trying to kind of tell me what you know, what could happen. So they were kind of listing through everything, and they just kept saying hysterectomy, like worst case, it will be a hysterectomy. We need you to sign this piece of paper to say that you understand that if we have to do a hysterectomy, then all of this stuff. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is madness. And then they were kind of telling me at that point, like what had happened. They were like, you've hemorrhaged, you've lost, at that point, I think it was about 1.6 litres of blood. And yeah, she was like, it's just on the line of where it becomes really worrying. And I was like, okay. So that kind of just sent me into meltdown. And when I think at that point, I'd held it together for like the whole time. And then when I was in theatre, Phil had Rhea, and all of this emotion just kept coming out of me. And I couldn't physically stop myself from crying. I was just laying on the bed, and everyone around me was so wonderful. I had this gorgeous midwife called Tor next to me. And she was really chatting me through everything that the doctor was doing. She was like wiping my tears away for me. I don't know why. I feel like I just felt everything in that moment. And I didn't have the responsibility of looking after Rhea because she was with Phil. And I think I just let myself go. And I just laid there and silently sobbed. And I'm probably laughing about it so that I don't cry about it right now. But it was really, really tough. And if you haven't had a spinal before, it does numb you. You can't feel any pain from the waist down, but you can feel pressure. And the procedures involved a few different things, and I knew exactly what they were doing. I could feel it in every part of my body, and it just felt really horrible, to be honest, and not something that I ever thought I'd go through. And it was quite traumatic. And yeah, it's just a couple, like I've said before, almost, I'd say 90% of the people that I dealt with, midwives especially, were absolutely wonderful. But there was a couple of doctors that messed some bits up that had quite a big impact on my treatment. And yeah, it just wasn't a great experience. And then when I came out of surgery, I got Rhea back, which was lovely, and we were having cuddles and stuff, but I started to feel so unwell naturally because of all of the blood that I'd lost, have just given birth, hadn't slept for 12 hours. I was just exhausted and felt so unwell, and the doctor recommended some anti-sickness drugs. So I was like, fine, let's go for that. So at this point, my mum and Phil switched. Juno wasn't very well. She was coming down with hand, foot and mouth, and it was the right decision for Phil to be with her and for someone to be with me. And that was my mum. And thank God she was, because I was so unwell at points that I couldn't even hold Rhea. So back to the story, I felt really sick and really unwell. So they gave me anti-sickness, and I had a bit of a reaction to it, which is just perfect. And it made me feel even worse. I couldn't lift my arms. I couldn't lift my legs. I could hardly move my head from side to side. And this lasted about an hour. And every time I shut my eyes to go to sleep, I just had this sensation in my body that was just like indescribable. It was the worst. It wasn't pain. It wasn't sickness. It was just like this feeling of, I can't explain it. And I can't even think about how it feels. I've never felt it before, but I just couldn't sleep because of this feeling. I'd shut my eyes and I'd try, and I'd just literally jolt awake again. My poor mum was watching the whole thing. She was just like, what is going on? I think she was really worried, but she was trying not to worry me. So she was just kind of taking it all in and thinking about, like, should this be happening? Is this okay? Like, sort of, trying to process it all as well. But yeah, that happened. So I couldn't really hold Rhea at all through that. I tried at points, but I was just like, Mum, this isn't safe. Like I haven't got the strength. So my mum held her and comforted her. And obviously when they're that young, when they've literally just been born, they just sleep. They don't even really want milk. They just sleep. So that was great. And as the day went on and on, I felt better and better. So it got to about 8 p.m, I think. And I was like, you can probably head off now and I'll try and get some sleep. And I did. I think I got about 3 hours and woke up the next morning again, felt so much better. Still not at all myself, but compared to how I did feel after surgery, after being in the surgery, I felt so much better. So yeah, that was that. Phil got Juno into nursery the following morning. I had like my catheter removed and everything like that. And then I was thinking in my head, like, I'm going home today. I'm going to go home and I'm going to be there for when Juno is back from nursery. And I made it my mission. So I was like, what do I need to do? The midwife said you need to do 3 big wheeze. I think it was over 150 ml. So I was like, right, fill up my gallon bottle of water. I was like, I am going to do 3 big wheeze. Drank my way through it, did 3 big wheeze. She said, you need to eat. You need to have your, what's it called, cannula removed, which was really painful actually. So I was like, get it out. I don't want it. It was so painful. I still got a bit of a cut on my hand from it. So I was like, get that out. And yeah, so just worked my way through the tick list. She had to have her newborn checks. She had to have a blood test, just a few extra bits. So we did all of that. And it got to about 2 p.m. and they were like, yep, you can leave. It might have even been 3. I think we had about an hour until Juno finished nursery. So we got home, we did a quick unpacking of everything, and Phil went and picked Juno up from nursery. And that was that. That was the experience. Last week, my video came out of Juno and Rhea meeting for the first time. So if you want to watch that, go and check it out. I'll also link that in the description down below. So that was the experience. That was my birth experience. And like I have said before, I see 2 sides to it. I have this beautiful birth experience, bringing Rhea into the world, which was wonderful. And then there's what happened afterwards, which was quite traumatic and has actually put me off having more kids because I don't want to go through that again. And I just, yeah, it really wasn't a nice experience and something that I really don't want to experience again. So if there is a possibility of that happening, a higher risk, I'm done. I'm really happy with 2 as well. 2 gorgeous girls. They're both beautiful and I love them so much. And, you know, maybe one day I'll get a dog. If I need another kid, I'll just get a dog. But yeah, I'm just seeing it as a really positive birth experience and, you know, something that happened afterwards. I wouldn't say it was negative. It wasn't super negative. It just wasn't, you know, planned for. It's not something that I wanted to experience. It's not something that anyone would want to experience. But it happened and it's fine and it's okay and I'm fine and Rhea's fine and that is all that matters. So yeah, that is my birth story. I hope you've enjoyed listening to me waffle on about it. I could talk about it for ages. I love talking about it. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it and I'll see you next week for another video. Lots of love. Bye.